Trigonometry. In the previous lesson, we looked at Pythagorean theorem. In this lesson, we'll be looking at the sine, cosine, and tangent ratios and their inverses. This is what progress looks like. You should be able to solve problems like these. First question, determine the values of the following correct to 3 significant figures. Here's the problem. 9 times sine of 60 degrees. Well, let's see how we use our calculator to do that. So you press 9, then the sine button, and simply enter 60. You may close the bracket, you don't have to. Press equal. Once you get a fraction, you press the S to D button. Let's get it again. And you should see 7.79422, etc. Now what do you do here? So what you want to do is to write up to 3 significant figures as requested. So let's write the number that we're seeing in the calculator. 7.79422, 86, etc. Now we only want 3 significant figures. Now the first significant figure in a number is the first digit. When we are looking from left to right, reading from left to right, the first non-zero digit that we see is the first significant. So our 7 here is not a 0, so it's our first significant figure. The next digit is our second significant figure. Mind you, right after the first non-zero digit, even a 0 afterwards will be significant. So we have 7.7, and the 9 is our third significant figure. So what we want to do is to write from 7 right up to 9. But we always have to check the very next digit of those we're cutting off. And that digit, if it's 5 or more, we will add 1 to the third significant figure as asked. But given that the very first digit that we're cutting off is less than 5, we'll leave the 9 as 9. That is the digit in the third significant position. So our answer will be 7.79. Next, we're asked to do the same thing. Determine the value of the following correct to 3 significant figures. Using our calculator, let's see how we do this. We press 13 divided by, and then we press the cosine button. Enter the degrees, that is 30, close bracket. If you see a fraction button, you press the SD button, and that will give us 15.011107. So let's write that down. We have 15.011107. We want to write up to 3 significant figures. The first non-zero digit, that's the first digit that's not 0 in the number moving from left to right, that's not 0, is our first significant. The 5 is our second significant. Now here we have a 0. After the decimal point, once we started counting significant digits, the 0 after the point will be significant, such as long as we have significant figures before that. So this 0 here is also significant. So this is our third significant figure. Now, so we were going to write from the first right up to the third significant figure or digit. Now, since this is at the third significant position, we will check the very next digit to see if it's 5 or more. Because it's less than 5, we'll maintain the 0 as 0. If this digit were 5 or more, we would add a 1 to the digit in the third significant position if this digit was 5 or more. Given that it's less than 5, we will leave 0 as 0. So our answer is, and so this is our answer, corrected to 3 significant figures. By the way, zeros at the end of a decimal are significant. Keep that in mind. Now we have 25 divided by tangent of 29 degrees. Let's see, we'll do that in our calculator. 25, press the division button, then press the tan button and enter 29 equal. We get 45.10119388. Now before we go any further, ensure that your calculator is in the degree mode. You should see a button marked DRG. You'll press that until you get a D, which represents degrees. So ensure your calculator is in the degree mode. If not, then you may have to enter this button here, which is the mode button. All right, you might have to press Shift, then click on the mode button, and then you should see degree. You select that one. But let's look at the number that we have after dividing 25 by tan 29. We get 45.10119, etc. We only want up to 3 significant figures. So we start from 5 right up to 1. The 4 is the first, 5 is the second, and this one is our third significant figure. So that's the one we're going to choose to either keep as 1 or add a 1 to it. That depends on the very next digit. The very next digit is less than 5, and so we'll leave the 1 as 1. So our answer will be 45.1. Now let's look at this. We want to determine the value. In this case, what we have here is an x, so we want to determine the value of this x. Now how do we do that? Well, what we want to do to find x, we need to ask ourselves the question, what number, when we find the sign of it, we get 2/3? Well, what we're going to do is to transpose the sign. Once we transpose this sign to the next side of the equation, it goes over as the sine inverse. Goes over as sine inverse. So the sine inverse of what? What number is already over this side? 2/3. So we want to enter this in our calculator. Let's see how we do that. So what we do, we press Shift on our calculator, our second function, then sine, and that gives us sine inverse. And then we enter 2 divided by 3. Press the equal button, and that gives us our value. Now, we could actually also press, let's go over this, Shift, then press sine, which gives us sine inverse, and then we press the ABC button, or the fraction button here, so can we enter the fraction 2/3. Then equal, and we get 41.8. That gives us 41.8. So sine inverse of 2/3, that will give us the value for x, which is 41.810349. All right, now we only want 3 significant figures. So we start from the 4, the first significant figure, and we count up to the third significant figure. We check the very next digit to see if we should maintain it or add a 1 to it. Since the digit after 8 is less than 5, we'll maintain 8 as 8. So our answer to 3 significant figures is 41.8. This will be degrees because it's a sine of an angle. So this will be this x equal 41.8 degrees. Now this is corrected to 3 significant figures. Part B, and we're asked to find P here. Cosine of an angle P gives us 0.707. The cosine of what number gives us 0.707? One of the fastest ways to do that is to transpose the cosine to the other side as the cosine inverse. So we can say P is equal to the cosine inverse. So when we transpose cosine over, it becomes cosine inverse. Cosine inverse of the quantity that's already on that side, that is the right hand side, which is 0.07. And then we're going to use our calculator to do that. So we press the second function, or shift, and press the cosine button, which shifts to the cosine inverse. Then we enter 0.707. We may close the bracket and then press equal, and that will give us 45.0086, etc. So let's write that answer. P is equal to 45.00865, etc. Now remember, we only want 3 significant figures. The first is our first significant, the 5 here is our second significant, and the 0, since this 0 comes after the decimal point following a significant figure. In other words, we had significant figures before the point, so the 0 right after will be significant. And by the way, zeros in between 2 significant figures are significant. So all non-zero digits are significant. So this 4 and 5 are significant, and this 865 are also significant. So these zeros in between them will also be significant. That's another way of looking at it. But nevertheless, as long as we have significant figures before, the 0 after the point will therefore be significant. So we start with the first 2 significant figures and we go to the third. Should we write 45.0? Well, we want to check the very next digit. It's less than 5, and so we'll leave this 0 as 0. So our answer will be, in degrees, 45.0 degrees. And this is corrected to 3 significant figures. You may want to write the word corrected to 3 significant figures. Let's do the next one. And like we did in the past few questions, what we want to do is to transpose this tangent over so that we can find what y is. The tangent of what angle gives us 3/4 or 0.75. When we transpose tan, it goes over as what? That's correct. Tan goes to the other side of the equation as tan inverse. Tan inverse. But the tan inverse of what? The value that's already over there, which is 3/4. And so y is equal to tan inverse of 3/4. Now let's look at how we do that in the calculator. So we want to press shift, our second function, then tan, so it shifts to tan inverse. Then we enter 3 divided by 4. We can use the ABC button or the fraction button and then enter those values. And we get the angle of 36.86. So that gives us 36.86, 989, etc. We only want 3 significant figures, so to 3 significant figures, we'll have 36.8, but we have to check the very next digit, which is over 5, and so we'll add 1 to this 8. And so our answer will be, to 3 significant figures, 36.9 degrees, because we added 1 to the 8. And this is corrected to 3 significant figures. Now here we have a problem here where we want to solve this equation for x. Now how do we do that? Now as long as you have the unknown in the numerator, you should multiply the other 2 quantities. So we want to multiply cosine 30 degrees by 10.7. If you want to know why we get that answer in terms of 10.7 times cosine 30, why is that the case that we multiply them? Let's see. Well, let me use an illustration here. Let's say we have 3/6, which is equal to 1/2. Cross multiplying will give us the correct answer. So we can actually multiply 6 by 1 and then 3 multiplied by the 2. And both sides will be equal, correct? 3 2s will give us 6, and 6 times 1 will also give us 6. Cross multiplying, numerator times denominator. Denominator times numerator. We get the same answers. So that shows that, that will give us the correct answer. We can use that same principle by putting this over 1, and then we multiply 1 times x, which gives us x, and then we'll have cosine 30 times 10.7. So we cross multiplying because we have an equal sign between two fractions. So numerator times denominator and numerator times denominator. Again, we cross multiply, meaning we multiply numerator by denominator. And so this gives us 1 times x, which is x, and 10.7 multiplied by the cosine of 30 degrees. We don't have to use the multiplication symbol. As long as we have the quantity and the cosine of 30 degrees, it implies that they're already multiplying. So we don't need to put the times symbol. So it implies that we're multiplying these. Now let's see how we do that in our calculator. 10.7 multiplied by the cosine of 30 degrees. We may put a bracket here. So let's look at that. So as you see, our answer is 9.26647, etc. But we only want 3 significant figures. So we're going to start from the 9 and write up to the 6. So you want to write more than 3 significant figures so that you can actually round properly. All right, so we're going to check the very next digit, and it's over 5. 5 or more, we always add a 1 to the required position. So we wanted 3 significant figures. The first 6 is at the third significant position. Should we add a 1 to it or not depends on the next digit. And so depending on the next digit is over 5 or more, so we add 1 to the 6, which give us 9.7. And this is not degrees though. All right, this is not degrees. So this is x equal 9.27, and this will be in centimeters. Okay, because remember, we would have converted the cosine of 30 degrees to an ordinary number and then multiply by 10.7 centimeters. So our answer is actually in centimeters. And so this is corrected to 3 sig fig. Next question. We're going to do the same thing here to solve for x. Put this over 1. And then we're going to do what? Multiplying denominator by numerator and denominator by numerator. And so this gives us 1 times x, gives us x. And sine 30 times 8.7, it's good to put the 8.7 first, and then put the sine 30 afterwards. If you put the 8.7 after, your calculator might calculate the sine of 30 times 8.7, meaning after multiplying 8.7 by 30, your calculator will find the sine of that answer. But that's not what this is saying. This is saying find the sine of 30, which is actually 0.5 or a half, and a half of 8.7, which will be 4.35. So you want to find 8.7 times a half, which is sine 30. Well, let's see how we do that in our calculator though. Okay, so our answer is 4.35. So x is equal to 4.35. And again, this is in centimeters. All right, so now we will look at the next part of the question. We want to find sine 30 degrees being equal to 4.5 centimeters over x. So we're finding x, or solving for x. So again, as long as what we're trying to find is in the denominator, we will simply switch with the quantity here. Now remember, this quantity is in the numerator because we can put sine 30 over 1. And so all we need to do is to switch the denominator with the numerator. In other words, this is in the denominator. So when I transpose it, it goes to the numerator. And then I'll transpose the sine 30 from the numerator to the other side in the denominator. So what this x is doing is dividing. When it goes across, it multiplies sine 30. And when sine 30, which is also multiplying x, when transposed, will be dividing 4.5. So the idea, we can just switch these two quantities. But in case you're not familiar with that, we can just go ahead and put this over 1. And since we have two fractions equal, we can just cross multiply numerator. In this case, the 1 is a denominator. So the 1 will multiply the numerator. And the sine 30, which is in the numerator, will multiply the denominator. All right, so let's go. Now I want to have the x on the left hand side. I mean, there's no reason necessarily for that, but I put sine x times sine 30 equal, provide the equal sign, and then 1 times 4.5 centimeters. Now, I want to get rid of this sine 30 degrees. And sine 30 degrees here is multiplying x. So to get rid of it, I'll treat it like a coefficient. How you get rid of coefficient? By dividing by the coefficient, the multiplier. So what I do to one side, I do to the next. So I'll divide this side here as well by sine of 30. And so what happened here is that this sine 30 degrees will cancel out with sine 30 degrees. In other words, sine 30 into itself goes once. How do I say this? Sine 30 into sine 30 goes once. Sine 30 into sine 30 goes once. And so now I have x being equal to 4.5 times 1 is 4.5. So I'm dividing 4.5 by the sine of 30. By the way, the sine of 30 is really 0.5. So if I press sine 30 degrees in my calculator, I'll get 0.5. Now, dividing by a half, because 0.5 is a half, dividing by a half is the same thing as multiplying by 2, the reciprocal. So 4.5 times 2, that will give me 9 centimeters. But let's use our calculator to check this out in terms of 4.5 divided by sine 30. That's 4.5 divided by sine 30. And we'll get 9. So there you see, we could simply, from this here, we divide 4.5 by sine of 30 and go straight to our answer of 9.